Hello, Mr. Stipes here to teach you about slope today. If you're following along at home, this is Learning Ladder 5.1, and we will be looking at page 4 here, example 1. How do we find the slope given 2 points and 2 coordinates here? So quickly review about what slope is. Slope is defined as the rise over the run of a line. So it's the rise over the run. How do we move up and down, and how much do we move left and right? The equation that we're going to use to find slope is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So let's go ahead and get started here with this. So, for those of you at home, go ahead and write this down. It's the rise over the run. That is how we define slope. So our first example that we're going to look at here is right here. Let's find the slope given these 2 points. And the 2 points are 2, 3 and 9, 7. So again, our equation for slope is m equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Now, you may be thinking, well, what's y2, y1, x2, x1? Here's how you know. You're going to be given the 2 points. The first point that you have, label it 1. The second point, label 2. Since these are coordinate points, they're given to us in x, y. So, the x, y from the first point would be x1 and y1. The second order pair would be x2 and y2. So now to simply find the slope, all we have to do is plug in the values that were given here for x1, y1 and x2, y2 into our equation for slope. So let's see what we get here. First off, m equals y2. My y2 value in this case is 7 minus my y1 value, which again is the y coordinate given in the first point, in this case 3. Take 7 minus 3 and divide it by x2, which is 9, minus x1, which is given to us as 2. From this point forward, all we have to do is simplify. 7 minus 3 is 4. 9 minus 2 is 7. So our slope for these 2 points is m equals 4/7. Now remember, some things you need to know about slope. 3 main key parts. Slope is usually represented as an improper fraction or an integer or a fraction, a reduced fraction. The fraction representing slope must be reduced. Even if it's an improper fraction or a regular fraction, it has to be reduced. And a negative over a negative gives you a positive slope, because a negative divided by a negative is a positive. So, you have 3 examples down there now that you can do on your own. If you need to look back at the example that we just did, go ahead and just go back on this video. For example 2, we're going to be finding a 0 or undefined slope here. So, whenever you use the slope formula that we just went over, there are certain cases where the change in y may become 0 or the change in x may become 0. So we're going to look at a couple of those examples right now. So again, why is the slope here undefined? 5 divided by 0? It's because you cannot divide by 0. If you divide by 0, that line is undefined. So you would write UND, or undefined, as the solution. If you ever simplify your slope equation and get a number divided by 0. Now how do you get a 0 slope? If you have 0 divided by, in this case, -2, you can take 0 and divide it by anything, but your result is 0. So in this case here, this would give me a result of a slope of 0. This would give me a slope of undefined, which I abbreviate sometimes as UND. So, what we're going to look at now are 2 examples here where we get a 0 slope, and another example of where we get an undefined slope. For this first example, we're given the points 3, 5, and 8, 5. So again, we're going to use our equation for slope, which is m equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So now we're going to plug in these points that we are given and solve for our slope. So let's go ahead and get started here. Change in y first. y2 value is 5, so my slope is equal to 5 minus my y1 value, which is 5, divided by my x2 value, which is 8, minus my x1 value, which is 3. When I simplify here, 5 minus 5 gives me 0, and 8 minus 3 gives me 5. So my slope is 0 divided by 5. Remember, like we just did above, 0 divided by anything gives us 0. So my slope in this first example is going to be 0. Now, let's look at another example here where we get an undefined slope. So, second problem that we're going to use here is 2 comma 6, or 2 comma negative 6, I'm sorry, and 2 comma 5. So again, using our equation for slope, plug in the values and solve. So m is going to equal y2, which is 5, minus our y1 value, which is negative 6. So I'm going to put this in parentheses here. We'll look at that in just a second. Divide that by x2, which is 2, minus x1, which is also 2. Now, when we simplify this, we have to remember, if we're subtracting by a negative number, that's the same thing as addition, because a negative times a negative is a positive. So when I simplify this, I have 5 plus 6 over 2 minus 2. Now, simplify the rest of the way, top and the bottom. 5 plus 6 is 11. 2 minus 2 gives me 0. So now I have an integer being divided by 0. And like we looked above, that cannot happen because we cannot divide by 0. So if I get 0 in the denominator, my resulting slope is undefined, which I can write out just like this. So you now see an example of a 0 slope and a slope of undefined. Let's go ahead and take a look now at example 3. For example 3, we're going to go to the bottom of page 5 of our learning ladder here. And what this asks us to do is find the value of r so that the line through r6 and 10, negative 3 has a slope of negative 3/2. So what we're going to do here is we're going to use the points given to us and the slope that was given to us, plug it all into the slope formula, and solve for our unknown variable. So again, start with your slope formula. M equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Plug in the values that were given to you. Our slope was defined as negative 3/2. So in my equation, I'm going to change m and substitute in with negative 3/2. Plug in my y2 and my y1 value. Now some of you may be asking, does it matter which point I plug in? It really doesn't. But as a rule of thumb for me, I always take the first point that I get and make that my first point, and make the second point my second point. That way I'm being very consistent with x2, x1, y2, and y1. Okay? Plug in the values here, and as you can see from this example, you get negative 3 minus 6 divided by 10 minus r. So now we need to simplify. We simplify what we can. We cannot take 10 minus r because those are two different terms. So we leave it as 10 minus r. Simplify everything else, we get negative 9 in the numerator, and have that equal to negative 3/2. From this point forward now, what we need to do is cross multiply. We need to find the cross product of these here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to assign the negative and negative 3/2 to the numerator and make that a negative 3. So I'm going to multiply negative 3 here by this entire value of 10 minus r. When I do that, I put that on my left side, and that's going to equal 2 times negative 9. When I do that, I simplify down, and I make sure I do my distributive properly correctly, multiplying everything inside by negative 3. I get negative 30 plus 3r equals negative 18. And from this point forward, I'm solving for r. Add 30 to both sides, 3r equals 12. Divide both sides by 3, and I get a result of r equals 4. So that was one example that was already done for us. And now let's look at one more together here, because this can be a little bit of a tricky topic. So find the value of r so that the line passes through each pair of points has the given slope. This is the top of page 6. So we're going to look at this first example that we're given here. Our points are 6, 2, 9, r, and our slope is negative 1. Step 1, start with your equation for slope. M equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And we're going to plug in the information that was given to us here. Remember, 6, 2 is going to be our first point. 9, r is going to be our second point. And our slope, negative 1. plug in the values that were given here, and we end up getting an equation of -1 equals r minus 2 over 9 minus 6. Now at this point we need to stop for 1 second. We're going to simplify what we have here. However, we are eventually going to be taking the cross product here. So what I like to do is if I'm giving an integer for my slope, I go ahead and make it an improper fraction. So I'm going to change this -1 here to -1 over 1. So I'm going to go ahead and rewrite that now. -1 divided by 1 equals r minus 2. And that same process, I'm also going to go ahead and simplify the denominator that I have here of 9 minus 6 and get 3. So now I've, in theory, basically set up a proportion that I'm going to solve now. And I'm going to solve by taking the cross product. So I'm going to take -1, multiply it by 3, and I'm also going to take 1 and multiply it by the entire quantity, r minus 2. When I do that, my result is -1 times 3 equals 1 times the quantity, r minus 2. Now remember, you're not just multiplying this integer down here by r. You're multiplying it by the entire thing, which is why you need parentheses. Go ahead now, simplify this problem, and you can find your value for r. -1 times 3 gives me a -3 equal to r minus 2. Solve for r by adding 2 to both sides. And when I finish off, I get a value of r being -1. So -1 is my missing value that allows these 2 points to have the slope that was given to us.